The gale rolled off the mountains like a pack of wolves, tearing shingles from the poorest roofs and rattling every crooked latch in Ashvale's lower lanes. Inside a lean-to cottage stitched from salvaged boards and stubborn hope, Mira bent over a lamplight, coaxing thread through the eye of a needle with fingers nicked from too many mends. Work meant bread. Bread meant tomorrow. That was the math of her life since winter took her mother, and the mines swallowed her father whole. A crack of thunder slapped the little room dark. Perfect, she muttered, patting for flint. Then scritch. Not wind. A soft, frantic scuffing at the shutter. Mira eased the latch. The storm punched in, flinging rain needles across the table, and with them a small, collapsing shadow. A bat. No bigger than her palm, a wing split as if by a cruel hook. Blood gleamed like ink. Old women in the market said bats were omens. But omens didn't tremble. Omens didn't look at you with gemstone eyes, trusting because they had no choice. Easy, little nightwing, Mira whispered, tearing a strip from her own hem. She dabbed the wound with boiled water, steadied her breath, then set tiny stitches, gentler than any seam she'd ever sewn. The creature let out a sigh so human she startled. There, she said, tucking it into a basket by the stove and covering it with wool scraps. Stay till the rain forgets your name. She lay down listening to the roof's drum and beneath it, the whisper of a heartbeat not entirely her own. Morning broke purple-bruised and strangely still. The basket was empty. In its place lay a single plume, longer than her hand, black that wasn't just color but depth, as if night had been pressed into feather. It chilled her skin and warmed it at once. Then bells tolled, notes no chapel in Ashvale owned. Mira stepped outside, shawl tight. Down the road came carriages the color of obsidian with fittings like frozen moonlight. Horses black as spilled ink stamped steam into the cold. People drew curtains. Knelt. Hid. A procession fit for legend stopped at Mira's door. A figure stepped from the foremost carriage, cloaked in twilight weave. His hair was raven dark, his face too still for a mortal, and his eyes, garnet lit from within, caught the thin dawn and did not burn. The air took on a scent like iron shaved into rose petals. Neighbors shrank behind half-walls and stacked barrels. Mira, feather in hand, could not make herself vanish. The stranger's gaze found her as if a thread had been tied between their eyes during the storm. Last night, he said, voice deep as cellars and smooth as velvet over steel. You bound the wound of your king. A ripple of gasps. Mira's throat worked. I sewed a nightwing. You set stitches in me, he replied, and for an instant his irises brightened to the exact red that had watched her from the basket. I am Valerian, sovereign of the Noctis court. You kept my sky from closing. Behind him, an assembly unfolded, pale nobles in dusk silver silks, attendants whose steps barely touched the ground, helmed guards bearing banners stitched with a crescent pierced by a needle. The symbol flickered through Mira's mind like prophecy. He extended a hand. The cloak's edge whispered rain. A debt is owed, Valerian said. And a debt of the crown is paid in person. I didn't do it for reward, she managed. That, he said, almost softly, is why it matters. The feather in her grip warmed, a pulse against her palm that answered the beat in his throat. Her neighbors would not look at her. Not Marta with her saint strings, not the baker who once traded day-old loaves for buttons. To them, Mira already belonged to the dark. If I refuse? She asked. Then fate keeps its ledger open, and unfinished lines invite wolves. His hand fell, leaving space for her choice to live or die in. I will not compel you. Something in her, perhaps the same stubborn piece that had sewn life into a torn wing, straightened its spine. I'll come, she said. A breath of relief crossed his features, quickly hidden. He turned, and the court bowed as if a second moon had risen in daylight. A carriage door opened on velvet black as deep water. Mira glanced once at her table, where last night's lamp had guttered to a curl of smoke. She stepped into a world that smelled like cold stars. The road climbed through pines old enough to remember names men forgot. Hooves made no sound, even the storm-run gutters lay quiet, as if the mountain were holding its breath. Inside the carriage, Valerian sat like a statue that had learned to breathe. In the half-light his eyes cooled toward black. "Do your kind travel by day?" Mira asked, then winced at her audacity. "Few. Fewer still without pain." The corner of his mouth tilted. "Your hand didn't only mend flesh. You touched a curse where curses do not welcome touch." They crossed the drawbridge groaning like some ancient throat and entered a citadel carved into the mountain's marrow. Spires of obsidian laced with veins of moonstone, galleries alive with lanterns that burned a soft, blue fire. Swarms of bats rose and settled like living constellations. "Welcome to Noctis," Valerian said, "where darkness learned to make its own light." They led her beneath a roof open to sky, an impossible chamber where hundreds of candles hung as if on invisible threads, their flames flickering like captive stars. At a long table, nobles turned to watch, eyes luminous, faces carved into beautiful masks that didn't quite fit human bones. "This is Mira of Ashvale," Valerian announced. She kept the King of Night from closing his eyes forever. A white-haired lady with a gaze like frost sighed a smile. "Noble stitches. But thread cannot heal what poison promises." "What poison?" Mira asked before fear could teach her silence. Valerian answered, not looking away. "A blade meant to end my line, forged before the eldest saints were saints. Your hands slowed what it carried. No hand of dawn should have been able to do that." The court rustled, silk on stone. She tasted the metal of their curiosity. "Let the mirror decide," said a low voice farther down, male, bored, dangerous. "If the reflection claims her, she's only mortal. If it refuses, a matter for the crown." Valerian's expression did not change. "Very well. Ad zenith." His eyes cut to Mira, an apology hidden just behind command. "You will not be harmed. Forgive me," she whispered, "if I prefer proofs." "And you shall have one," he murmured. "Even kings are judged." Midnight gathered like silk. The mirror hall was a corridor of glass, walls, floor, ceiling, a tunnel of reflections, 1,000 mirrors at 1,000 slants. Valerian stood beside her, a dark hinge in all that light. "It takes nothing you do not give," he said, fingertips touching the central pane. The surface rippled like moon water in a bowl. Mira stepped forward. Cold bloomed up her arms. Her reflection blinked once, and smiled without her. A rush of silver sigils raced across the glass, old letters that made her bones ring. Then her mirror self reached out. When their palms met through the impossible surface, power moved like a quiet storm. Somewhere behind, someone hissed. "Impossible." Light rose, encircling her in a crown's worth of brilliance. When it faded, the pane was clear again, only her breath fogging it. Valerian's hand steadied her before she knew she was swaying. "The hall has not spoken since the Queen of Threads vanished," the white-haired lady breathed, wonder bared like a blade. Valerian didn't look away from Mira. "Then it remembers her." "I don't," Mira said, voice thin. "Memory sleeps where it is safest," he answered. "It wakes when the world begs." They climbed spiral stairs that felt like shells coiled within shells. Murals of liquid silver moved when you weren't staring, scenes of a mortal crowned by moonlight, standing beside a king with night in his eyes. Hair prickled along Mira's neck. The painted woman's mouth held her own stubborn tilt. "She built this court," Valerian said. "Wove memory into stone to keep us from forgetting who we were." He paused before a loom strung with threads that were not threads but thin lines of light and shadow, each humming as if plucked by invisible hands. Her work. The Queen of Threads. She bound what blood could not. Mira reached without meaning to. Images leapt, a red moon and a door of stone, a woman lifting light with both hands, a younger Valerian reaching, not to take, but to catch. The vision snapped like a thread pulled too tight. "What did she bind?" Mira asked, swallowing. "Old hungers," he said. "The kind that eat names and leave only thirst. The seal complains. It has been." His gaze flicked toward the floor as if to the mountain heart. "Restless. And you think?" I think you stitched more than a wing. The council gathered beneath a ceiling open to a black lilac sky. A red moon hung low, as if listening. Valerian drew a dagger of silver glass and reversed it, offering Mira the hilt. A blood oath, freely given, names you under my protection. I'm a seamstress, Mira said, even as something in her steadied. Then you know how to join what would rather fray. She pricked her thumb. One drop fell, silver bright, haloed. It touched the dark stone and incandescent lines flared, interlacing into a sigil shaped like a crown pierced by a needle. The court bowed, some with reverence, some with the bow one gives a blade. The mountain groaned, not with threat but with memory waking. Far below, a door's dream shifted. Mira felt it, the way one feels a weather change in old scars. Your Majesty, said the frost-haired lady, Lady Seraphine, someone whispered. If the seal complains, the Queen's echo might soothe it. Her eyes slid to Mira. Or unmake it. Valerian's jaw set. We will not risk her. Mira lifted her chin. If I am the thread, I choose where I tie. Silence rippled. Valerian measured her, then nodded once, not king to subject but one stubborn soul to another. We go together, he said. I'll be your tether. The gate sat in the mountain's belly, a fissure laced with chains etched in runes that smelled like moondamp iron. Whispering rose from it not in words but in ache. The scholars of shadow, faces hidden, voices papery with centuries, formed a ring and began to chant. Listen only for me, Valerian murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. He smelled like winter and old cedar. Hold to the line between our breaths. Mira stepped into the dream. She stood in a city built of panes. Streets mirrored sky. Towers were windows to more windows. Every corner held the echo of her face and strangers' mouths forming silent, breaking prayers. At the center, a door like the gate, but unchained, breathing. Shapes slid from it. Bodies of smoke and old bone, eyes like coins lost in a wishing well. They moved wrong, not with rhythm but with appetite. Queen, they whispered without tongue. You left us to starve on sleep. I am not your queen, Mira said, though the city pulled at her balance. I am the stitcher sent to tighten what time loosened. A tallest shadow came forward. Its features shifted like oil, one heartbeat Valerian, the next Mira, then a mouth she had seen only in murals. Thread breaks, it hissed. We hunger through it. Mira opened her hands. Silver lines spilled from her fingers, thread that wasn't thread, light that remembered how to weave. The lattice she cast hummed like a loom at harvest time. It cinched around the breathing door, each crossing a small star. The city screamed. Somewhere, distant as dawn, she felt Valerian's breath pull at hers. Back, he whispered through the tether. Back to me. The last knot tugged hard. Pain sang up her arms. She tied it anyway. Light drowned the city and broke into snow. She woke on cold stone, the scholars circle around her, the chains on the gate glowing with a calm, steady pulse. Valerian knelt, hands scorched where the anchoring sigils had bitten him. He didn't seem to notice. Mira, he said, voice hoarse. You came back. Because you pulled, she answered, laughing and crying at the same time. The seal sleeps again, a scholar rasped. 1,000 years of quiet, if quiet remembers how. Mira looked at the crown of her own mark, now faintly ringed in midnight. Mercy didn't break you, she told the gate or herself. Forgetting did. Dawn reached the towers and did not burn them. The Noctis court gathered under a sky wearing both sun and a ghost of moon, murmuring as if a god had cleared its throat. Valerian stood on a balcony, face turned to light he endured rather than welcomed. Mira touched his gloved hand, the tremor in it softened. Messengers arrived like migrating birds. Wolves with scrolls tied to their ruffs, fae whose words tasted of frost, mortal riders with eyes too wide. Hope traveled beside fear, and fear traveled faster. Let them see us, Mira said in the war hall, where maps spooled like rivers. Not as story, but as neighbors. Neighbors have expectations, Seraphine warned. And gossip. Then we give them truth, Valerian said. We will meet the mortal crown at the river. They rode at first light. The forest watched with the patience of things that outlive kings. At the border, golden banners snapped above polished helms. The mortal king's jaw was carved from worry. So the tale breathes, he said when Valerian stepped into the sun. Night walks daylight and doesn't smoke. It stings, Valerian admitted, steady. But pain rarely dictates what is right. The king's attention shifted to Mira. And you, seamstress of storms, are you miracle or threat? Thread, she said. Which one depends on what we stitch. Something uncoiled in his face that might have been respect. He offered his hand. Two sovereigns met in light and lived through it. That night both courts celebrated warily, as if joy were a balcony with a suspect rail. Music rose. Laughter tried on its old clothes. From the threshold, Valerian watched Mira dance, awkward for one turn, then finding a rhythm that made the room widen around her. Do you know what you've done? He asked when she returned breathless. Fixed a tear, she said. We'll see if it holds. Piece held like a button sewn in haste, doing the job, asking not to be yanked. Whispers crept anyway, servants waking with strange sigils, mirrors catching expressions their owners didn't make. To still the rumors, Valerian announced a masquerade beneath the blood moon, the first in an age. Let day and night dance where once they only hid. The halls bloomed with crimson candlelight and ribbons of silver radiance. Fountains spilled starlit water. Masks turned strangers into bolder strangers. Mira came last, crowned in delicate filigree that felt heavier than iron. The room breathed her in. Valerian offered his hand. They descended together. For a while the world was music. Then a guest in crimson silk stepped from the sea of masks. His mask was a smiling sun, cracked like old enamel. He bowed too deep. Majesties, he said, voice accord with notes that didn't belong together. A remembrance from those who dream beneath your feet. In his palm lay a shard of black glass, gate stone that should never exist outside the mountain. It pulsed. Shadows in the corners stood up. The music fled down its own throat. Valerian's guards moved, but the strangers shattered the shard with a laugh like splitting ice. Shapes formed, humanoid, featureless, moving with silk-slick wrongness. Screams rose. Mira's mark flared, a star under skin. She thrust her palms wide. Argent light strode from her like a wall. Valerian's sword drew arcs that burned after-image comets. Still the shadows multiplied, delighted by fear. The moon, he called, and Mira sprinted for the balcony, tearing the curtains so the blood moon poured into the hall. Under that red blessing the creatures unraveled into smoke that smelled of frost and old ash. The crimson guest was gone. Only a sliver of gatestone throbbed at Mira's feet like a dying heart. They're learning to wear us, Valerian said into the ringing quiet. They're learning to fear us, she answered, and wasn't sure which lesson would cost more. Sleep thinned to a film after the masquerade. When Mira closed her eyes, the hall of glass breathed behind them, her reflection smiling with a mouth too sharp. On the third night without rest, Valerian found her in the oldest library wing, candles slumped into puddles and a snow of loosened gilt on the floor. You'll burn yourself down, he said quietly. I need to know why the mirror smiled, she answered, not looking up from a cracked folio. It knew me. It knew more than me. He set a hand on the table, scars from anchoring spells pale against his skin. The Queen of Threads practiced mirror work. She split what would have ruined her, rage, hunger, the will to cut instead of sew, and folded it into an echo to keep her heart clean enough to bind the gate. Mira's mouth went dry. Then my echo isn't only me. It is a piece of her that learned to speak in your bones, Valerian said. If it wakes fully, it will try to wear you. The nameless love doors. Then we close this one, Mira said, standing too fast. The room swayed, the shelves creaked as if sympathetic. She steadied, breathed, and pushed the folio away. Take me to the gate again. I'll go into the dream and ask my shadow to sit or be sewn in. Valerian studied her. You're sure? No, she said. But I am stitched to a world that keeps unraveling. We don't fix it by waiting. He hesitated one heartbeat, then nodded. I'll tie the tether tighter. The gate room was colder than before, not in temperature but in decision. Chains pulsed a dimmer silver as if light had learned to ration itself. Scholars formed their circle, voices rasping in chord. Valerian traced anchoring sigils across Mira's wrists, then pressed his forehead to hers. Listen for my breath, he murmured. If you can't hear it, make me a new one. Mira stepped, and the dream took her like a tide. No city this time. A corridor of mirrors bending into forever, each surface throwing back a different Mira, child with blood on her knuckles from defending a bread loaf, woman crowned in holly, corpse with moonlight eyes, queen whose smile could tilt a court. From the far end, naked footfalls soft as moth wings. Her reflection came out of the shimmer. Identical save for the irises, Mira's held cool moon, the echoes burned with dusk. You brought light into our mouth, the echo purred. Now it tastes everything sweeter. You're a part of me, Mira said. But you're not the part that decides. Decides? The echo laughed. You beg peace from wolves and men who like the sound of their steel more than their children's names. Let me make choices that hold. Images flickered, burning fields, a river turned to glass, 100 quiet graves and one nation that never starved again. Mira's stomach clenched. Join with me, the echo whispered. We'll stitch with wire, not thread. No more tearing. The tether tugged, Valerian's breath in her ear, rough and real. Mira exhaled into it. Strength without mercy is only hunger in armor, she said. I won't wear that. The echo's smile cracked. Mirrors lifted from walls like blades. Wind screamed with glass. Mira pressed palms together, drew shadow with one hand, light with the other, and braided them until the cord hummed like a dragonfly's heart. You live in me, she said. But you don't steer. She cast the braided cord. It cinched the storm, drew it back into the echo's spine. The world flashed white. Stone hit her shoulder. Anchoring sigils sizzled out. Valerian's hands hovered near her cheek like praying birds. With me? With you, she breathed, and realized the mark at her wrist had changed. No longer a plain crown but a weave of night and dawn, threads braided into a circle that refused to break. The echo? He asked. Bound, she said. Not muzzled. Part of me, not pilot. The scholar's leader bowed his masthead. Balance holds for now. For now is how anything worth keeping begins, Mira said, and only later felt how tired she was. That evening, under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to be violet or copper, the court convened with more knives hidden in their eyes than on their belts. Seraphine's voice was satin over steel. Majesty, the border villages report wrong dawns. Bread rises at midnight. Wolves whelp at noon. If balance favors novelty over order, we trade one catastrophe for another. Until the gate's old hunger stops pushing back, the world will feel the shove, Valerian said. We mend, it tests the seam. Mira met them all without blinking. We need days of steadiness. Give me 3. Then judge me. A murmur, half derision, half reluctant faith. Seraphine's lashes dipped. 3 days, she agreed. But if the bread burns again at midnight, you will hear from bakers and queens alike. They worked like a workshop possessed. Mira walked the terraces at dawn, palms skimming the air as if it were cloth she meant to smooth. She whispered names into the wind, names of rivers and saints, names of abandoned fields, names of mothers who had no more sons to trade to mines. Where she spoke, the light corrected itself, not with a snap but with a sigh. Valerian sat court with sleeves rolled and temper anchored, mediating grievances so old they had become furniture, a FA envoy accusing a wolf lord of hunting through a treaty glen, a mortal tinsmith wanting payment for lanterns installed a century earlier. He listened, and where listening wasn't enough he cut through with judgments that felt like stitching rather than amputation. At night they returned to the gate, strengthening sigils until the stones sang low. Mira slept in snatches against Valerian's shoulder, while he read reports by a candle that never seemed to shrink. In the small hours, he whispered a history no chronicle wrote, his first morning after the crown, the years he learned to drink less blood and more patience, the names of old friends who chose fire. She filed each syllable inside her bones. On the second night, a raven arrived with a ribbon tied in mortal gold. The message was brief: the river waits. Speak with me before men who love war speak for us both. Aldemar, king of the Dalelands. Clever man, Valerian murmured, reading it twice. Or frightened, Mira said. Both are reasons that can be used. They met at the border stone where the river's voice could drown a poor argument and perfume a good one. Aldemar looked 20 years older than the hand she'd shaken, a king who'd slept on campaign maps too long. You ask for steadiness, he said to Mira without preamble. My people ask for night with their sleep and day with their work. I am fond of poetry, Highness, but not when it feeds riots. Then feed me the truth, Mira answered. Name what frightens you most, and we'll mend that seemed first. Chaos, he said. And court whispers that your king seeks a day-walking army. Valerian's brow did not move. Would I meet you here in sunlight if I wanted surprise? Aldemar's mouth tipped, just barely. Kings have done worse with better smiles. Mira unrolled a square of linen across the stone and set her feather on it. The plume's darkness drank the light. This is what steadies the sky, she said. Not my will. A bargain. I mend 3 names into the day and night: hearth, harvest, rest. While the seal heals, the world will obey these first. Dawn will favor ovens. Evening will favor fields. Midnight will favor sleep for creatures that want it. The bell the gate hears will be predictable. Aldemar stared, then laughed once, surprised at his own sound. If this works, I will send you 100 bakers' blessings. If it fails, Valerian said, send just 1 honest curse. We'll adjust. The king nodded, slower this time. Then I will speak peace where I can. But your mask, what happened there will grow legs and teeth in rumor. It already has, Mira said. I prefer to give it shoes. Shoes, it turned out, looked like 20 envoys eating cautiously beneath a ceiling that mirrored the first new stars. Mira stood in the open hall with a blackboard dragged in from a tutor's room and chalked 3 sigils that any grandmother could love: a loaf, a sheaf, a crescent pillow. Until further mending, she said. Bake when the loaf warms, reap when the sheaf glows, sleep when the pillow breathes. If your body doesn't listen, tell it the queen said so. Laughter cracked and then spread, thin but real. Seraphine watched, expression a geometry Mira did not yet know how to solve. When the hall thinned, the lady approached with 2 goblets. A toast, your grace, she said, voice like cool water over iron. To thread that holds. Mira took the cup, sniffed, berries, nothing darker. To thread that learns. She drank, then held Seraphine's gaze. You were the first to suggest the mirror. You knew it might claim me. I believed it already had, Seraphine replied. If Noctis must love again, let it be honest. Love? Mira asked before wisdom could bite her tongue. Seraphine's mouth made a pitying curve. You truly don't see him when he looks at you. Heat climbed Mira's throat. I see a king who values repair. And a woman who pretends her own mending requires no knots. Seraphine's courtesy cut even when it soothed. Careful, Majesty. We who live long learn to embroider our lies. On the 3rd midnight of steadiness, fires flared on the far ridge, signal pyres, then answering flares below. No battle horn, not yet. A message. Valerian was already at the stair when Mira reached the tower. Scouts, he said. Something moves along the old aqueduct. They took 6 dusk knights and Seraphine, whose blades were conversation's other swords lost. The aqueduct's ribs crossed the ravine like the bones of a sleeping titan. Something, some many, moved beneath, figures swathed in travel-stained cloaks, walking in too perfect step. Mira's skin prickled. Do you feel that? Valerian did. She saw it in the set of his jaw. Not danger exactly. Expectation, the kind that rooms had right before truth entered. He signaled the knights to fan. The cloak line halted. Their leader lowered his hood. Not a man. A woman whose eyes were mirror-bright, whose left cheek carried a hairline crack as if she were porcelain that refused to break. Majesties, she called, voice echoing in a way air should not allow. We come to surrender what is ours. Name it, Valerian said, sword relaxed but ready. She held up a gloved palm. A faint glow pulsed beneath the leather, rhythmic and wrong. Dreamfire, Mira whispered. The same pulse the shard had given on the ballroom floor. We were given these by a man wearing the sun, the woman said. He told us they would keep our dead from sleeping. He told us we'd never be hungry. He told us we could live beside you without fear. He lied. She peeled the glove. The sigil beneath crawled like a living rune. Seraphine hissed despite herself. Help us, the woman said, and this time her echoing voice cracked into a mortal one. Please! They brought the caravan into the mountain by routes that taught the feet humility. In the lower infirmary, Mira stood between pallets while the scholars arranged bowls of salt water and basin mirrors blacked with soot. Valerian moved among the cots like a silent firebreak, lending steadiness with the simple fact of his presence. The sigils did not want to be guests. Each pulsed at the sight of the gate, as if eager to run home. The first man on the table arched when the mirror was held above his chest. The rune flared, and for a breath the room wore 100 wrong silhouettes. Look only at me, Mira told him, hand on his sternum. She plucked at the air, found the tiniest thread of light that ran under the skin like a fishbone. There you are. Drawing it was like unpicking a seam stitched by an enemy who knew her hands. The thread burned her fingers. Seraphine caught her wrist, pressed the cool ring to her knuckles. Use it, she said. Old moon silver. The line came free with a gasp that emptied the lamp chimneys. The sigil on the man's palm withered to a scar. He sobbed once, both hands over his eyes as if the room were too bright. It took until dawn to free them all, 47 travelers, 47 wrong fires made right. When the last line snapped, Mira's knees shook. Valerian slid an arm beneath her elbow without ceremony. Who is he? Mira asked the porcelain-cheeked woman when speech returned. The one in the sun mask? We called him the Daybearer, she said. He smelled like warm coin and old rain. He didn't cast a shadow. Valerian's gaze cut to the window where morning tried its teeth on the peaks. Masks as old as the gate are moving on a daylit board, he said. Mira closed her eyes, feeling the echo inside her stir, not angry now, but awake, alert. Then we learn new stitches, she said. Ones that hold even when the cloth pretends it isn't cloth. Outside, the bells began to ring, not fear, not warning, but the signal the bakers had asked for. Hearth time. Somewhere beyond the mountain, an oven door opened at the right hour, and a child laughed because bread rose when bread was meant to rise. For the first time in months, dawn smelled of ordinary things, bread, smoke, stone warmed by light. The caravan slept safely inside the walls, watched by guards who kept finding excuses to peek in just to see the miracle breathing evenly on the cots. Mira stood on the parapet wrapped in a wool cloak, the wind threading through her hair like careful fingers. Valerian joined her, quiet as habit. They'll tell tales about you, he said. They already do. They'll say you stitched life back in today. She smiled faintly. Then let them say the thread was shared. Below, farmers from the valley came bearing baskets of early fruit, offerings laid at the foot of the mountain. The Queen of Dusk and Dawn, they called her now. Mira watched a child drop a handful of wildflowers and race back, laughing, her small joy bright enough to outshine rumor. Do you regret it? Valerian asked suddenly. What? Feeding the bat. Mira looked at him, saw the old exhaustion under his composure. If I hadn't, I would still be mending torn sleeves for men who think patience is servitude. He considered that, then nodded slowly. And I would still be dreaming myself to death in a body that had forgotten why it woke. For a moment, the world between them held no titles, no thrones, only the brief, clean silence of understanding. Then the bells changed their tune. Not hearth bells, not warning. Something older, deeper, a sound that made the castle walls hum. Valerian's head lifted. That's the mountain's call. Mira's fingers tightened on the stone rail. The gate? He shook his head, eyes narrowing toward the valley. No. Something beneath it. They descended to the archives, where dust lay thicker than scripture, and the air smelled of iron left too long in water. The scholars of shadow were waiting, masks lowered in respect but hands trembling on their scrolls. One bowed low. Majesties. The gate stirs, but the sound came from deeper still. Below the foundations. The Heartstone. Valerian frowned. The Heartstone was sealed when the first court rose. It feeds the mountain, not the gate. Then something has woken it, the scholar said. Mira brushed dust from an open tome. Drawings of veins, lines pulsing from the gate's core to a black circle at the mountain's base. If the Heartstone beats, the gate listens. The rhythm of one controls the breath of the other. Valerian looked at her. And if that rhythm falters? The mountain breaks its own ribs. They moved quickly, torches trembling against slick walls. The descent felt endless, spirals carved by hands that believed eternity could be measured by stone. At last they entered a cavern that glowed faintly red, light bleeding from the rock itself. In its center stood a pillar of crystal shot through with black veins, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. It looks alive, Mira murmured. It is, said a voice they didn't recognize. From behind the pillar stepped Seraphine. Her face was pale but her smile sharp. Forgive the secrecy. I came before you. I wanted to see what our queen truly reigns over. What have you done? Valerian asked, each syllable balanced like a blade. Nothing yet, she said sweetly. But tell me, Majesty, how long can you stitch the world when the fabric itself wants to tear? Her hand lifted. The black veins inside the crystal flared, throbbing faster, hungrier. The ground shuddered, dust falling like gray snow. Stop! Mira shouted. Seraphine's smile widened. Stop it! I just set it free. The Heartstone split with a sound like worlds grinding teeth. Red light flooded the cavern. From the fracture poured shadow, dense, liquid, alive. It coiled around Seraphine's body, threads of darkness twisting into her veins. She gasped, then laughed, head thrown back. You kept the hunger sleeping too long, she cried. Let it breathe, and it will serve the strongest will. Valerian moved before thought, his blade singing silver arcs, but the shadow caught it mid-swing and melted it to ash. Mira reached for her own power, feeling the echo stir in her chest, her mirror self, alert and waiting. Lend me your strength, she whispered inwardly. For once, the echo answered. I don't mind helping myself. Light burst from Mira's hands, golden white threaded with ink-dark veins, the balance of both halves. It met the shadow halfway, the two forces clawing for dominance. The cavern convulsed, walls cracking like brittle glass. Seraphine screamed, her eyes turning mirror bright as the thing inside her tried to claim a mouth. Valerian caught her arm, forcing steel through her gaze. Fight it, he commanded. You are not its vessel. Her voice came back doubled, one part Seraphine, one part the ancient hunger. We are all vessels, king. Some just have larger cups. Mira thrust both palms forward. The light expanded, wrapping Seraphine in a cage of shimmering thread. The shadow writhed, striking at Mira's wrists, but she held until her lungs felt full of lightning. Then, with a sound like torn cloth, the darkness ripped free, rising into a shapeless form that filled the air with the scent of blood and memory. The thing turned toward Mira and spoke without a mouth, child of dawn and dusk. You are my unfinished line. Mira's knees buckled. She had heard that voice before, inside the dream, whispering promises. You're the one beneath the gate, she said. We are the first hunger, it answered, its form twisting into faces that weren't faces, echoes of every vampire who had ever fallen to thirst. We fed the gods when they still bled. Valerian stepped between them, cloak flaring. "You're bound. You cannot leave this mountain." "Bound?" the creature purred. "By thread and mercy. Both fray." It struck. Darkness rushed forward like water breaking its dam. Valerian caught the edge of the blow, the air around him screaming as shadow met the remnants of his silver guard. Mira threw her hands wide, weaving light into nets faster than she could think. Each one held for a breath, then broke. "Valerian!" she cried. "It's pulling the heartstone into itself." "Then cut it loose!" She reached inward again, not for the light, but for the echo. The darker part of her smiled within. "Now you ask?" Together they reached deeper, into the wound that had once been the queen of threads, the seam between creation and ruin. Mira's voice came out doubled this time, her own and the echoes overlapping. "If you want the thread, take it from the hand that wove you." A single strand of pure light coalesced between her palms. She flung it. The strand struck the shadow square in its chest, piercing through. It howled, not in pain, but in surprise. The red glow of the heartstone dimmed. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the light collapsed, pulling the creature back into itself, folding its vastness into a trembling orb of smoke that fell to the ground and shivered once before going still. Mira dropped to her knees. Valerian caught her, chest heaving. "Is it over?" She stared at the now quiet stone. "No," she whispered. "It's sealed inside me now." And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether that was victory or inheritance. Silence pressed in, vast and waiting. The glow beneath the heartstone flickered once and went dark. All that remained was the soft hiss of cooling rock. Mira's breath came in broken stitches. Valerian's hands were still on her shoulders, steadying her against a world that felt too heavy to balance. "The shadow," he said quietly. "It's gone." Mira shook her head. "No. It's contained. But not gone." He searched her eyes, one still the color of twilight, the other faintly gold. "In you?" "Yes." Her voice trembled on the edge of exhaustion. "I pulled it inside before it could tear through the mountain. It's dormant for now, but it knows my heartbeat." She pressed a palm to her chest, feeling the faint thrum of something ancient beating just beneath her skin. Seraphine lay crumpled near the edge of the cavern, pale as paper, her body shuddering with the aftershock of whatever had tried to wear her. Mira crawled to her side and lifted her head gently. Seraphine's eyes fluttered open, clear, human. Did I free it?" "No," Mira said softly. "You almost did. But the hunger chose a different host." Seraphine blinked tears she didn't understand. "I only wanted to remind the court what it was made of. Shadows, not charity. And now you've reminded us," Valerian said, his voice flat but not cruel. "You'll stay confined until we know the hunger can't find you again." She nodded weakly. "Yes, Majesty." When the guards carried her away, Mira leaned into Valerian's shoulder, whispering, "I can still hear it breathing." He looked at her, jaw set. "Then we'll make the world too loud for it to speak." They left the cavern, and for the first time since the dawn returned to Noctis, Mira felt cold not from the mountain, but from something within. The court gathered at dusk. Lanterns burned blue, casting pale halos across faces drawn tight with unease. Mira sat beside Valerian on the obsidian dais, her fingers coiled around the black feather she still carried from that first storm, the beginning of all things. "The heartstone is sealed again," Valerian announced. "The hunger no longer walks the deep halls." Murmurs rippled, disbelief mixed with relief. Mira could feel their eyes on her, their queen who shimmered like dawn and dusk both, and whose shadow now stretched just a little too far. "What of Lady Seraphine?" one of the elder nobles asked. "She lives," Mira said, "and will remain under watch until the sickness within her fades." The elder inclined his head, but his tone was wary. "And if it does not?" Mira met his gaze. "Then she will not suffer alone." Her eyes glowed faintly as she spoke, and the court fell silent. After the council dismissed, Valerian followed her to the balcony that overlooked the valley. The mist below glowed faintly violet in the twin light of sun and moon. "You carry it well," he said quietly. "But I can feel it in the air. The hunger isn't sleeping. It's watching." Mira closed her eyes. "It waits for me to falter. For anger, for grief, for any loose thread it can crawl through. Then I'll hold the thread." She smiled faintly. "You always do." When he left her alone, she stayed by the railing, listening to the mountain breathe beneath her. In the stillness, her reflection formed on the glass of the balcony door, not quite matching her movements, a heartbeat slower. And for the briefest moment, it smiled when she did not. 3 nights later, the dreams began again. In them, Mira stood at the edge of a vast ocean that pulsed like a heart. Each wave carried whispers, voices of the dead, of kings, of nameless creatures that had once fed on light. They begged to be remembered, and with every plea she felt her chest tighten. When she woke, her skin glowed faintly where the veins of shadow ran beneath. The hunger was stirring. Valerian found her pacing by the cold hearth. "You haven't slept. If I close my eyes, I dream their hunger," she said. "It's learning my shape. It wants my voice to become its own." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Then we teach it silence." "How?" "By showing it everything it can't control." He drew her into his arms and pressed his forehead to hers. For a moment, the darkness inside her quieted, as if the warmth of his body confused it. She felt the pulse between them merge, 2 heartbeats finding a single rhythm. "I can't lose you to this," Valerian murmured. "You won't," she whispered. "But if you ever see my eyes turn black, you run." "I won't." "You will," she said firmly. "Because mercy must survive, even if I don't." His silence was both promise and refusal. Outside, thunder rolled softly against the horizon. And deep within the mountain, the old chains of the gate gave a quiet, almost imperceptible shiver. Morning brought word from the mortal lands. The king of the Dalelands had fallen ill, his physicians baffled, his blood blackening like ink in his veins. Mira knew the cause before Valerian even spoke it aloud. "The hunger found another host," she said, staring out the window. "It's learning to travel through memory. Through dreams." Valerian's jaw clenched. "If it spreads beyond the mountain, no kingdom is safe." "We'll go to him," Mira said. "The mortal priests will never allow you near their dying king. Then I'll go as what I was before all this, as a seamstress who mends broken things." That night, disguised in simple wool and carrying only a small satchel of herbs and silver thread, Mira left the castle under a moon that glowed like a blade. Valerian insisted on following at a distance, unseen. The mortal palace was quieter than a tomb. Inside, the air reeked of iron and fear. The king lay pale and trembling, veins webbed with crawling blackness. At his bedside knelt a young healer, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. "Who are you?" she whispered when Mira entered. "A mender," Mira said. "Let me work." She placed her palm over the king's heart. The black veins pulsed faster, recognizing her. The hunger within her stirred, curious, whispering kin. Mira closed her eyes and spoke softly. "You've fed enough." Her power unfurled like thread, delicate and bright. Slowly, painstakingly, she drew the darkness from the king's body and into herself, weaving it into the shadows already bound to her soul. The room filled with a faint hum, like the sound of a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. When it was done, the king exhaled a long, shuddering breath and slept. Mira staggered, catching herself on the bedpost. The young healer stared in awe. "You took it. All of it." Mira smiled faintly. "It's better in one vessel than in many." Outside the window, Valerian watched as she left the room, her silhouette haloed by the rising dawn, and a faint darkness curling at her feet like smoke that refused to fade. The ride back to Noctis was slow, the morning sun dragging behind the clouds like a wound reluctant to close. Mira's cloak smelled of iron and salt, the same scent that filled the mortal king's chamber. Every few miles, her vision blurred, the horizon melting into threads of light and dark as the hunger stirred inside her, testing the walls she'd built. Valerian kept his horse beside hers, silent except for the crunch of hooves on frost. "How much did you take from him?" he asked at last. "All of it," she said. "Every drop of shadow that had learned his name. That's too much for any one soul. It's already mine, Valerian. I only brought home what I left behind." They reached the base of the mountain by twilight. The guards bowed as the gates opened, their eyes wide with reverence and fear. The air inside the citadel trembled faintly, reacting to the power that clung to her. The torches flared brighter, the shadows deeper. Mira's own reflection rippled in the marble floors like something alive beneath glass. In the hall, Seraphine awaited them, freed from confinement, though a silver chain still circled her wrist. She studied Mira's face, her lips curving into a wary half-smile. "So," she murmured, "our queen brings home a piece of the void." "I bring it home," Mira said softly, "because no one else could carry it." Seraphine's eyes gleamed with something between respect and sorrow. "Then may the gods remember your name before the dark forgets it." Valerian dismissed the courtiers and followed Mira to her chamber. When the doors shut behind them, he spoke quietly, almost afraid to disturb the air. "You can't keep binding this thing tighter. Eventually you'll run out of thread." She met his gaze, exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes. "Then I'll start weaving myself into the pattern." He reached for her hand. "And if you vanish? Then let the world I leave behind be steady enough to hold." They stood in silence until dawn burned faintly at the edges of the sky, either willing to speak the word that hovered between them, sacrifice. The next night Mira woke to the sound of her own heartbeat. It was loud, too loud, thundering like drums behind her ribs. She sat up, breath shallow. The room flickered between candlelight and darkness. For a heartbeat, she wasn't alone. Her reflection stood at the end of the room, watching her with that same patient smile she remembered from the balcony glass. "You took too much," the reflection said. "Now there's no difference between you and me. I'm still whole," Mira whispered. "Are you?" The reflection's voice was both hers and not hers, a harmony of defiance and despair. "You keep sewing rips into a dying world. But what happens when you are the tear?" The reflection stepped closer, each movement silent, fluid. The air turned cold enough to bite. Mira reached instinctively for her feather talisman, but it was gone. "Looking for this?" The reflection lifted it between two fingers. The black plume glowed faintly crimson, pulsing like a living vein. "You think this protects you? But it's just a reminder of what you stitched to your soul. Give it back. Take it." When Mira reached forward, her hand passed through the figure, sinking into a sensation like ice melting backward. Her mind filled with whispers, Valerian's voice, Seraphine's warning, the cries of every soul the hunger had ever touched. She jerked her hand back, trembling. "You can't destroy me," the reflection said. "You can only accept me. Or we'll both unravel." Then it stepped backward into the wall, dissolving into black dust. Mira collapsed onto the floor, the feather still clutched in her shaking hand. In the faint morning light, she saw her reflection again in the window, this time still, obedient. But its eyes glimmered red before fading to gold. Valerian found her in the observatory hours later, tracing constellations onto parchment with an unsteady hand. "I saw it again," she said without preamble. "The reflection. It's stronger now." He crossed the room, his cloak whispering against the floor. "It's not the reflection, Mira. It's what the hunger wants you to see. It's wearing your shape to test your will. Then it's learning too quickly." She laid the feather on the table. "Every time I use my power to mend something, it grows louder. Like it feeds on mercy." He studied her, the pale morning making his eyes almost human. "Then perhaps the only way to starve it is to stop fixing everything." She laughed softly, bitter. "You'd ask me to ignore a torn seam in the world? I'd ask you to survive long enough to sew another day." They stood together beneath the high glass ceiling, the sky beyond shifting from pale rose to silver blue. A thin crack ran across the eastern windowpane, an old flaw in the glass that had never been mended. Mira's fingers twitched, wanting to fix it. But this time, she didn't move. Valerian exhaled in relief. That's how it begins, he said. Not every fracture needs your thread. She turned to him, eyes soft. And not every king needs to bear the night alone. For a long moment neither spoke. The world outside the glass seemed to hold still, as if even the sun hesitated, unwilling to disturb them. Then somewhere deep within the mountain, the gate stirred once more, and this time, it whispered her name. The whisper grew louder each night, slipping between dreams and waking. Sometimes it was her voice calling herself. Sometimes it was hundreds, men, women, creatures that had once been mortal. The hunger wanted out. By the fifth night, Mira could no longer pretend she didn't hear it. She descended to the cavern alone, the black feather pressed against her palm like a brand. The heartstone pulsed faintly, its veins glowing the same dull red she'd seen when Seraphine broke it open. You're still alive, Mira said softly. The air quivered with a voice that wasn't sound but memory, because you are. A shape coalesced from the shadows, vague, human-shaped, and yet vast. We share the same threads now. You and I could make a world without breaking it. You destroy everything you touch. I remake it. The difference is only what word you choose to believe. The hunger extended a hand, long, dark fingers like smoke curling toward her. You could bring back what the world lost. Your mother, your father. The ones you stitched into graves. Mira's heart faltered. For a moment, the image of her parents flickered in the air, smiling, alive. The temptation was a blade made of love. Then she thought of the baker's laugh, of the child who dropped wildflowers at her gate, of Valerian's steady hands. They don't need to come back, she whispered. Because I'm still here. The light in her chest brightened, spilling across the floor like sunrise. The shadow recoiled, its edges fraying. You'll never silence me, it hissed. I don't need to, Mira said. I'll sing louder. And as she spoke, the cavern filled with a hum, a melody born from every act of mercy, every stitch, every heartbeat she had saved. The mountain itself began to glow, threads of light webbing through the stone. The hunger screamed, its form unraveling into dust. But as it vanished, one final whisper brushed her ear, you will need me again. By dawn, the mountain was still. Mira staggered from the cavern, her strength nearly gone but her spirit steady. The first rays of morning met her halfway down the stairs, warm against her skin. Valerian waited at the gate, his face pale with worry. What have you done? Ended what should have ended long ago. He caught her before she could fall. You burned yourself to do it. She smiled weakly. That's what fire is for. They carried her to the highest balcony as the day broke fully over the valley. Below, the world was peaceful, fields golden, rivers blue, smoke curling from chimneys and thin white ribbons. You saved them, he whispered. No, she said. We saved each other. He brushed her hair from her face, his touch careful, reverent. Rest now. Her eyes fluttered closed. Keep the thread, she murmured. And when it frays, mend it with love. Then her breathing slowed. The light around her dimmed to a faint shimmer before dissolving into the air, leaving only the black feather resting in Valerian's hand. He stared at it for a long time, the world around him holding its breath. Then he looked to the horizon, where dawn and dusk met seamlessly, and whispered, Sleep, my queen of threads. The world will remember your stitch. Years passed. The stories changed. Some said she became the morning star, others swore she wandered the world disguised as a seamstress, mending hearts instead of cloth. But in Noctis, every dawn and dusk arrived perfectly balanced, either too bright nor too long, just as she'd left it. Valerian ruled wisely, the feather always pinned to his cloak. When people asked why he never remarried, he would only say, Because the thread still holds. And on nights when the moon was red and the mountains whispered, the king could feel her presence in the wind, soft, patient, eternal. Somewhere, beyond light and shadow, Mira smiled. Because the world had finally learned to hold its own seams.